Hey there everyone, and welcome to another segment of SABOR Connect, where we connect you to important topics around the real estate industry. I'm your host, Gilbert Gonzalez, CEO of the San Antonio Board of Realtors. For the last few months, we've been in a data share agreement with the Houston Association of REALTORS, giving you access to a larger pool of real estate data, which can be valuable for comparative market analysis and increase referral opportunities. Joining us today is Vanessa Burgess, General Counsel of the Texas Real Estate Commission, who is here to explain what you should know about geographic competency so you can make the most out of this resource. Vanessa, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So we're calling it geographic competency, but it's actually just competency in general.
I think that's right. That's how I would describe it. Geographic competency it's almost like a sub-competency under the overall competency that license holders must have to maintain their license.
And is this new?
It is not new. It is new in that it has been carved out and sort of specifically highlighted, and I think there's been a lot of focused communications, things going on in some of the courses to highlight geographic competency, but license holders have always been required to be competent, and that includes knowing the area in which you sell, the market in which you sell, and that can get different in Texas, though we'll talk about this probably in a little bit. I think you can become geographically competent. There are ways to do it.
It is possible.
It is possible, yes.
So the question is, what does competency look like? And I would ask if we could use the example of our San Antonio agents now have access to this Houston data. Houston is definitely a different market. What would it look like for someone to want to be competent in Houston?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I had heard about this, the data exchange before, and I've heard folks be like, this is, that's impossible, but it's not impossible, right? So if you've got someone in San Antonio who is interested in selling in Houston, they need to learn Houston, and that is probably not super easy because Houston is big and Houston has its own stuff, right? I think the thing that first comes to everyone's mind, floods. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that door is shut, right? Living in San Antonio doesn't mean you could not sell in Houston. But I would say having access to the Houston market did not make you geographically competent in and of itself, right? Mm-hmm. So you would want to, if you're going to pick up a listing, you want to know Houston, you want to know that part of Houston, you want to know that neighborhood in Houston, you want to know what's going on around the specific, I'm going to just generally reference a house here, but like what's going on in that neighborhood? What's going on, does it back up to an aquifer? Are you in a flood zone? Like what's happening? What's been the historical stuff that's gone on there? And what's going on there now? Are there any new projects coming up? Stuff like that. So you could learn Houston, and I think vice versa. Someone in Houston could learn San Antonio, but there's an effort involved there, right? And you would know that. I would imagine every license holder wants to be truly competent and know what they are selling, know that they're showing their clients homes that they are themselves, familiar with that area. So it takes some effort, but it's definitely something that you would need to do in order to really and truly be competent to sell in another area.
And part of the rule says local market issues, so it doesn't necessarily mean that specific property. You need to be familiar with that. You should also just be familiar in general with other things that go on in Houston, as far as like the market, what it looks like, developments. 100%.
And Houston is such a great one because Houston is pretty varied, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know to be fair, I am not a San Antonio expert, nor am I a Houston expert, but I do have family in Houston. So, Houston has different zoning laws that they're pretty famous for. We've got the floods. We've got, I think of the energy corridor, that didn't used to be there, right? And so those are all new buildings that popped up, things like that. And the example I think that we've given is there a local community newspaper you can grab when you're at the supermarket there and take a look and see what's going on, things like that.
And I think when I was doing some research and looking into the rule, it also talks about knowing nationally state issues as well. So when we talk about competency, especially geographic competency, it's not just Texas. You should also know, be comfortable with knowing what's going on in the state as far as real estate, as well as the national market.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's fair. I mean, that's, we talk about competencies, like know your business, right? Know what's going on, because we know the national market impacts the state market, which impacts the local market. Although Texas sometimes tends to be its own. I think people are probably also tracking us, right?
Yeah.
So you want to know both, because people are going to, especially if you've got people coming from out of state, they're coming from their own perspective, and they may have a totally different view of what's going on. And if you are well versed in that, doesn't that make you a better provider to your client?
I think most of us started to have this conversation about someone selling in a different city because of the data share, but you could actually be found geographically incompetent in your own city.
100%.
And I saw the example online about if you were selling a piece of property and you were unfamiliar that that piece of property was actually being discussed as subject to eminent domain, you could be found incompetent geographically or just in general because you were unaware that that was going on and you didn't find that information out. Is that correct?
I think that could happen. I'm not going to say it's like a definite.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, but yeah,
yes,
that's 100%. That's something that could come up. Or, like I said, are you looking in an area that's got a 2-lane road and they're about to build a Costco and an Apple and all these things? That's, if you didn't know that, if you weren't paying attention to what's going on, and that's not hard to find out, right? Like it's really just some research. You might have someone who's unhappy and files a complaint because
they thought it was going to be residential. Turns out it's going to be converted commercial, or the investor was hoping to get this out of it. And in fact, if you would have done some research, you would have learned that's going to be impractical given whatever change is coming. Okay. So it could be just as simple as the other side of town you should be familiar with. So if you're used to selling downtown and you start going and selling in the suburbs, you should make sure you're aware. Don't just assume you're competent because you're in the same city. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. And we always give the examples and we try and make them pretty extreme, right?
Right.
So it's like, how could someone, I feel like the two ways, how could someone in Lubbock sell in Beaumont, right? And that, that's an easier example to give, but I think you're right. Like, do you know what's going on the west side of your town? Do you know, I think about Austin because that's where I'm from, but like, are you at an aquifer source? Is there we've got a dry creek, but when it rains, let me tell you, it's a little scary. Because are we going to flood? Are we not going to flood? And we knew that because we had someone who helped us with that, right? But I think, you don't have to be an expert, but you need to go that distance and know that you're truly competent for each transaction.
How does someone become competent?
That is a great question.
Okay.
I don't know. No,
I'm sure and I know it's a big question, right? So, but generally, how would you, either using the example of just in general, someone in San Antonio wants to be competent of their area, or the specific example, which is, how do you become competent in Houston? Like, how would you recommend someone stay on top of that issue? Yeah,
so I think something that can be great to do, and I think we talk about this in the broker responsibility course, is find some folks who are competent in that area. If you've got, if you know anyone, maybe if you're an agent, your broker can put you in touch with someone who does know the area a little bit more, can kind of show you like, oh, hey, there's all these different water districts, and there's certain areas that are prone to flooding. I think that's the one we always talk about. But also, did you know that, this area tends to, they're tending to see more commercial developments building up. You can find that out. So you could connect with folks. You can drive around, right? And that always seems like a good idea. Just drive around, and if, like I said, if you're seeing 7 new Costco's and a road being torn up and all that, like that's something to sort of store away. You can certainly Google things. I think that community newspaper one is a really good one. So if you're at the grocery store, grab one of those, just take a look and see what they're talking about. If you in our most recent Legal 1, Legal 2, I think we did like a real deep dive on geographic competency, and folks, I think, got a little bit stressed out in terms of like, wait, I got to know all the water districts and the this and the that. You don't need to be an expert, but I think knowing what's going on generally, like starting to learn Houston, learn the different areas, and then once you start working there, like really focus in and learn it that way. Like you learn through experience. So set your eyes on what you're trying to learn. But I say that, and I in no way mean to dissuade it, because I think you can do it.
And here's a tangential issue is, if you don't know, just say you don't know, because representing that you did is probably equally as bad. So just say you don't know, but I'm going to find out.
100%. That is a life answer. I think that's 100% the way to go, right? If you don't know. And if you start to think, you know what, I actually really don't know this, then you can refer, right? You don't have to do it. The access doesn't mean you have to do it. But if you are going to do it, you want to be competent. That's geographically, that's subject matter, that's everything. You want to be a competent license holder. Know your area.
So you have let me rephrase the question. What can happen if a realtor is determined not to have been competent, or that you feel like they have violated their geographic competency? What does that look like?
That looks typically like a complaint is filed against you. So we are, TREC is an complaint-driven enforcement system, meaning that we are not out looking, we're not, coming into your offices and asking. I think there used to be a little bit more of an audit system that way, but it's complaint driven. So what you're going to see is you're going to see someone who, your client, whoever it is that files that complaint, will file a complaint. There'll be an enforcement action, and if it appears as though, you were not geographically competent to sell this lake house, or wherever area you were, then you're subject to an enforcement penalty. I think it's that range of $500 to $3,000 daily. So nobody wants that.
No, we don't. Absolutely not. So last part of question with regards to competency is, it's not just geography, it is also practice area as well. So this applies to any specialization, whether farm and ranch, commercial, property management. You need to be familiar with the practice as well.
Yeah, that's subject matter competency. So when we talk about, and I think you said it great, like, this is not new. This is competency, and we're highlighting portions of it that are important. And I think, particularly geographic competency in a state like Texas, I think you do need to pay attention. I'm going to use that example. Lubbock looks really different than Beaumont for a variety of reasons, one of which is like the actual geography, right? But also, you're right, it's subject matter competency. Is this, are you doing farm and ranch and you're going to make that pivot to residential? Well, you've got to learn that. And hopefully you've got the resources to do that, in terms of, if you're an agent, you've got a broker you can go to who can, and if you're a broker, you're making sure that your agents are competent and they're not just kind of going all over the place and doing things that they aren't competent to do. The other one that I always highlight, and this is a little bit of a deviation, but like contract form competency, also really important. Like, know your contracts, know your subject matter. Like, this is your license, this is your business. And the more you know, and the more confident you are in what you know, then you will be serving your clients in a much better way. And then enforcement will never have heard your name.
And you'll probably be, really good at this business.
Yeah. Being
a good resource. Any last advice for our members who are watching this and curious about geographic competency or competency in general?
I think what I would say is, geographic competency is not intended to be something that dissuades a license holder from practicing. What it's meant to be is a heads up, this is also an obligation of your license, and it fits under competency. And the more you know, and the more research you do, and the work you put into it, the better you will be at your job and at having, future interactions, transactions with these clients. And I think, everyone kind of wins in that situation, right? We want to protect the consumer from the TREC side, and we want our license holders to meet that level of competency. And I think ultimately the license holder benefits from that.
Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing this knowledge with our members. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
And thank you to our members for watching this episode of SABOR Connect. Thank you for watching SABOR Connect. For more episodes and other SABOR videos, visit our YouTube channel, youtube.com/SA Board of Realtors. This episode is sponsored by ShowingTime, Supra, ListTrack, and CRS Data. To learn more about how they can help you in your business, head to sabor.com.